Welcome back to the Valley of the Suns podcast. I'm Kory Miller. Joining me on this edition, we have a roundtable with site expert Adam Maynes and also contributor Andrew Clark. Today we're going to be discussing more DeMarcus Cousins news, also talking about Jahlil Okafor and his rumored deal to New Orleans, and what's next for the Suns after that. Adam, what's the latest on Cousins?
Well, the latest on Cousins is that according to Vlade Divac of the Sacramento Kings, he flat out said, we are not shopping Cousins, we're not trading him with the Suns, we're not trading him to anybody else in the league. He is ours, he's here to stay. They fully intend on signing him to that massive $180 million plus contract. He is a King for at least the foreseeable future, and the Suns are obviously out of the DeMarcus Cousins superstar lottery, if you will. So it's right now what we can kind of do as Suns fans is look forward to another superstar lottery or the NBA draft lottery where the Suns might be able to draft a superstar or two. So at the moment, though, it is kind of a disappointment to those of us who were pulling for DeMarcus Cousins to come, to get traded to the Suns. I know that Kory, you and I were in that camp. Andrew, real quick, where did you sit? Did you want the Suns to get DeMarcus Cousins, or were you happy with them avoiding that at all costs?
I think Cousins certainly came with a lot of risk. I was okay with it if it was the rumored deal, which was Len Warren and a couple of picks. If it started to get more expansive than that to include Chris and Bender and others, then I was less in favor.
Yeah, I mean, if they had added Chris and Bender, that would have been that would have just been the greatest haul for any trade I think any team had ever gotten for anybody, right? I mean, two former lottery picks. All four former lottery picks plus two potential lottery draft picks. I mean, that would have been so much.
It just didn't make any sense. And the other thing is, if you've read anything about the Kings, you know that the owner is probably one of the most dysfunctional human beings on the planet.
Yeah.
And all you got to do is just kind of sit back and watch that thing implode, and you might be able to get DeMarcus for free. So unless you're getting a screaming deal, you don't want to get near that nuclear dump.
I think it's worth noting that all of this with Divac coming out and saying that he's absolutely not on the market, Cousins has been on the market to a certain extent for several years now. And I think the Kings have to realize that there's a really good shot they're not going to have him after next season if he doesn't re-sign now. So all of this could be a ploy, however unlikely, for Sacramento to kind of bring up his value a little bit as we approach the deadline. Because if there's one thing we know about the Kings, and Andrew touched on it a little bit, they're dysfunctional and you can't predict anything they'll do. And that's not just me talking. I've heard numerous NBA executives quoted saying that we have no idea what Sacramento ever does or what they're ever going to do. And they're normally viewed, at least recently under this new regime, as kind of being loose cannons. Is DeMarcus coming to Phoenix? Probably not. But it wouldn't shock me if he still moved sometime between now and the deadline.
Well, the deadline this year, the deadline next year, since he has signed through 2018.
It wouldn't surprise me if he's moved by the deadline this year. Like nothing coming out of Sacramento would surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if tomorrow morning we have a headline and he's signed for $207 million and he's locked up an extension. It wouldn't surprise me if he came out tomorrow and said he's absolutely not going to play in Sacramento long term. And it wouldn't surprise me if Sacramento moved him tomorrow or held on to him as long as they possibly could. It's a dysfunctional franchise from the top down. I don't think we can ever really take them at face value when they say that they're not going to move Cousins to anyone. Because I'm sure that if the right deal popped up, they would have to consider it.
Yeah, I mean, if Boston comes around and is like, hey, I'll give you Brown, and I'll give you the number one overall pick this year, which seems likely, and, maybe I'll throw in a Marcus Smart, I think you'd be crazy not to take a long look at that deal if you're Sacramento.
Exactly.
Well, they do need a point guard. Sacramento, that is.
They do, and Boston's got too many.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, Marcus Smart, and then the presumption is that if not the first overall pick, the second overall pick, possibly the fourth and fifth overall picks will all be point guards, so they could set themselves up at the point guard of the future with a Marcus Smart who can kind of be the point guard of the now to kind of just tie them over, and there you go. So, all right, DeMarcus Cousins is presumably off the board. This Suns fans can now kind of look forward to another big man that has been a hot topic in the Valley for a while now, and that's 76ers center Jahlil Okafor. So today is February 7th, for those of you who are listening after tonight, and as of yesterday evening, the 6th, it was rumored that the New Orleans Pelicans were in talks and presumably very close to acquiring Jahlil Okafor for either Omar Ashik or Alexei Ajincev and a future 2018 first-round pick. I'm obviously a Suns fan, and I've been on the Jahlil Okafor bandwagon for a long time now. I do think he has some tremendous upside, so I would like to talk about the pros and cons of the Suns trading for him. But to me, what this is, as a Suns fan, if the Suns do miss out on a potential star talent like Okafor, is missing out on Harden. If James Harden was traded from Oklahoma City to Houston for what amounted to be nothing, and the Suns had enough pieces that they absolutely could have matched, if not exceeded, the deal that Houston made for Harden. Now, I'm not going to compare Okafor to Harden in terms of the raw talent, in terms of the superstar potential, but I don't think anybody really thought that Harden was going to be the superstar that he has become, especially now under Mike D'Antoni. So we are missing out, if this trade does go through, on acquiring a potential superstar. What do you guys think? I mean, I say go get him, and I think we can match Alexei Ajincev or Omar Ashik in a future first-round pick, especially next year when we have two. Andrew, why don't you go ahead and go first?
I think that trading for Jahlil Okafor would be the worst move the Suns have made in a decade, easily. Probably since they overpaid Marcus Banks. And the reason for that is primarily that Okafor can't play defense. And if you put Okafor long-term on a team with Devin Booker, who also can't play defense, you're just going to sit there and watch teams rack up 140 points a night on you. So it just doesn't make any sense. And I know that Okafor is in a weird, tough spot, but he's declining in his production, and he's 21 years old. I mean, that sends up red flags. And then you've got the gun held to a head incident, and you've got a fake ID, and you've got all sorts of these kind of maturity concerns on top of that. And so I know that Watson's trying to build an environment that's there that fosters it, but I just don't think it's a good situation for the Suns, especially with the kind of assets Philly's looking to get back out of this. If this was a dumpster fire where they're going to give him away for a second-round pick, I think that'd be great. But where they're looking for a first-round pick and more, I just think the Suns should steer clear.
Well, wait a second. A future first-round pick and if they want a veteran big man, they can have Alex Len in exchange. Hell, if they want Tyson Chandler, I would prefer Chandler on the team with Okafor just, again, to kind of help foster that kind of improvement in maturity-wise. But that's not a bad trade if you're trading a former number 3 overall pick is a future first and Alex Len. I mean, Kory, would you take that? I mean, I think that'd be a fair trade.
I'm not giving up a single pick for Okafor. I'm willing to take a risk on him, and I'm probably willing to give a little bit more than Andrew is, because I'd be willing to give more than a second-round pick. I would want to give up some kind of package of, we give them Brandon Knight for Okafor straight up. We give them.
Oh boy, I would love that.
We give them Brandon Knight and a second-round pick. We give them maybe Len straight up if we're not planning on re-signing Len, because he'll be a restricted free agent after this year. PJ Tucker and maybe a second-round pick. When it comes to including a first-round pick, I don't think it's worth it. As Andrew pointed out, there are defensive concerns. I think he's still young enough and he's still talented enough to where he could just need a change of scenery in terms of some of the issues he's faced. He's never going to be a good low-post defender. And actually, I heard in a podcast episode from one of the major news outlets recently that Okafor was the second worst low-post defender in the league this year. But the worst may surprise you, and that's Karl Anthony Towns.
Wow.
And one of the points that they made was, in the NBA right now, there's not a lot of good low-post defenders, especially with the way the game's played, with space and pace. So that's a problem, and definitely Booker himself is a giant defensive liability. But I'm willing to roll the dice on him because he was someone who was almost a first overall pick, and we're only 2 years removed from that. And a change of scenery and a different coaching staff may be able to help get something out of him.
Well, and then I'd like to add this in terms of his defensive liabilities. And Kory, you and I have both written about this in the past. This year, as of today, as of February 7th, the Suns are allowing an average, of 112.6 points per game to their opponents. This is the worst single game scoring average for a Phoenix Suns team since 1987-88. So that includes Tyson Chandler. Tyson Chandler is at least part of the defensive equation. PJ Tucker is part of the defensive equation. Eric Bledsoe, who's a very solid front court defender. Backcourt defender. So, I mean, we've got some defensive pieces, and yet the Suns are still allowing 112 points per game. Would Okafor shoot that up to 115? No. I mean, for me, even if we were stagnant, I think it's a talent issue, or it's probably actually, truthfully, more of a system issue than a talent issue. So, I mean, I just don't think he would make the Suns that much worse.
I think the Suns have a couple solid defenders, and they're the ones you named: Tyson, PJ, Bledsoe on the perimeter has been pretty good. The biggest issues with the Suns, and Andrew mentioned it a little bit with Booker. Booker's a defensive liability, no matter who's on right now, and hopefully he gets a little bit better at that as he grows. I mean, he's still only 20 years old. He's still just learning how to play in this league. And then Chris is in the same boat where he just gets lost on rotations at some points. And so when you have good defenders, when you have two liabilities like that on the floor at the same time, especially young players who can just get completely lost, it can really negate any good defenders you may have on the court. And I think, and I'll throw this back to Andrew, but I think the biggest concern with Okafor is that by taking away a defensive plus and adding another liability, you'd basically have almost no shot of getting stops late in games when you needed it.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. If you look at the modern NBA, they've caught up to the Spurs, right? Everybody's switching and trying to isolate bad defenders to exploit that weakness. And so the Suns' overall draft philosophy lately has been really good, in my opinion. They're trying to get Bender and Chris and Warren, very athletic guys who can defend multiple positions, who can't be exposed in switches. And even though they're young and inexperienced, you can see the defensive potential. But when you look at Okafor, it would be really easy to isolate him, and especially if you're going to put Booker and Okafor into a pick-and-roll situation, you're going to pick that apart all day. So if you're taking Okafor on the team, you can't play him at the same time as Booker, and Booker's obviously going to play the majority of minutes. So at best, you're bringing Okafor on to be your second-string center, and even then, you really lose the defensive liability. I'm not sure he's much better on a permanent basis than Alex Len, even on the offensive end, and that's kind of concerning overall.
Well, okay, so then that's the defensive side. On the offensive side, where Jahlil Okafor would be a significant improvement in the front court, replace his at the moment is averaging 11.5 points. That's not fair. Last season, played 53 games, started 48. He averaged 17.5 points.
You're right, and that is Tyson doesn't give you that type of productivity offensively, but Tyson's been really underrated on the offensive side of the ball this season, I think. He's shooting something like 68% from the field. He's been very efficient. He's been hyper efficient, and he's actually having his best offensive season, I think, in 3 or 4 years. So no, Tyson's not going to be a 20-10 guy, and that's never really been his game. But I don't have the numbers in front of me. I know Okafor averaged 17-something last season, but I'd be interested to see what his field goal percentage was and how many of those buckets were kind of garbage time buckets, because the Sixers were still awful last season. They weren't like they were this year with Embiid, where they're actually winning games and being competitive. And
I actually have some of those stats for you to hopefully help that point.
Yeah.
So right now, Tyson Chandler is averaging 68.4% from the field. If he keeps that for the rest of the season, that would be his career high. His former career high was 67.9, where he led the league back in 11-12, where he was 29 years old. Jahlil Okafor last year, his field goal percentage was significantly lower, 50.8%, to again, currently Tyson Chandler 68.4, so an 18-point drop. However, he took, last season 14.7 field goal attempts, whereas this year Tyson Chandler is attempting 4.9. So I do think that volume shooters do tend to have lower percentages than low volume shooters, just because odds are they're taking a lot more shots because they're a bigger part of the offense. It's true. Tyson Chandler not being part of the offense. Go ahead, go back to you, Kory.
It's completely true. I mean, Okafor would be more productive offensively. He will score more points. But the question is that what the Suns need right now? You know, when you have Bledsoe and you have Booker and you have TJ Warren, who, especially at the beginning of the year and still at stretches, has shown that you have 3 guys who can go out and score 20 to 30 points a game when they need to. And I think Chris is going to end up in that camp too. Recently, Chris has had a couple 20-point games, and as he grows and matures into his game, I think Chris is going to be a really athletic stretch 4 with some range. the future makeup of the Suns is going to be, you're going to have guys 1 to 4, and any of them will be able to go off for 25 points in a game. Is that really something you need out of your low post guy like Okafor if you have to give up the defensive side?
And when you account for the range, the effective field goal rate that Alex Len has is not that much different than what Jahlil Okafor has right now. Mm-hmm. You're talking about 0.1%, but you compare the fact that Len also gives you almost twice as many rebounds, and he's giving you blocking, and he's a lot more nimble in a lot of ways.
Yep.
The marginal difference isn't that high. And then you think of the assets you have to give up to get Okafor. You can go out and draft Zach Collins out of Gonzaga, who's going to give you a lot better return for what the modern NBA is going to look like, or what it's going to look like in 5 years from now.
Yep.
All right. Well, so we've discussed DeMarcus Cousins. That doesn't look like it's going to happen. We've discussed Jahlil Okafor. I think there is still a chance, and Andrew off-air did discuss it. He's actually questioning whether that trade to New Orleans will ever actually happen, and I am leaning in that, to that opinion as well, because I've got to imagine that would have happened kind of immediately. I don't know why they would have released it now. It's still 24 hours later. It's like, well, we still don't even know. So what do the Suns do next, however, if Okafor and Cousins are both off the board? Andrew, what do you think? We've got 7 games and about 15 days until the trade deadline. What do the Suns do if neither of those players are available any longer?
I think Eric Bledsoe suddenly gets a bum knee for a week, and you let Brandon Knight play and try to drive his value up. But the reality is I think they're taking the right approach right now, which is to say, hey, we've got a first-round draft pick bar. If you want Jared Dudley, if you want P.J. Tucker, if you want Tyson Chandler, whoever you want kind of our veterans, you can have, but you can have it for a first-round pick. And if somebody's desperate and they pony up for it, great. And then the only other consideration is you got to figure out what to do with Eric Bledsoe, because he's really in an odd spot. He's too old to be part of the base that's developing right now, but he's young enough that, he really could be there for the next 4 or 5 years or more. He's playing at a high level. He's dropping 40-point games here a bunch in the last 2 weeks. So, maybe there's a blockbuster deal to be made there that might include TJ Warren or some other pieces you probably wouldn't want to get up with, but I think you'd have to find somebody who's desperate and ready to just give over the bank for you.
All right, Kory, what do you think?
I completely agree about Bledsoe. Actually, going back to one of our earlier podcasts, we had a discussion on whether it was time to trade Bledsoe, and we had a former Suns beat writer on as a special guest, and he and I both agreed if you're going to trade Bledsoe, now is the time. His value is at an all-time peak, and it's not just the production, it's the contract he's on, especially with the new CBA in place. Bledsoe's only going to make $14 million each of the next 2 seasons. That's gold right now in terms of an NBA contract, especially with his production. Not only is he too old to join kind of what the Suns are building, because I think the Suns are probably at least 2 years, if not longer, away. Not only is Bledsoe too old, you're going to have to pay him again, and he's going to probably demand a max contract or very close to it after 2 years. So even if you bypass the age and you think of, well, we want Bledsoe to be the point guard of the future for this Booker-centric team we're building, you're going to have to go out and pay Bledsoe the max. Booker's going to be a max player. And then at that point, it doesn't give you as much flexibility to fill the other gaps you need to fill on this team. So I think no matter how you look at it, Bledsoe needs to be dealt. It doesn't mean he has to go now at the trade deadline, but I would hope that the Suns would explore all possibilities with him in the offseason, especially if they keep their pick, and they're probably going to be picking 2, and they're picking between Lonzo Ball and Markelle Fultz, and both of those are point guards. So I think that's the point. Around draft time, after the lottery's been decided, you got to start shopping Bledsoe, because you're probably picking a point guard, and for all these other reasons that we've stated, you'll get the highest return on investment on Bledsoe now. In terms of what I hope or think they'll do now, between now and the deadline, I would hope that they get rid of Brandon Knight. I've been very adamant and kind of sharing my opinion on that almost this entire season. I do hope that they keep Tyson Chandler, because I think his leadership and kind of his mentorship is invaluable to the team right now, and I think he's playing well enough to justify remaining on this team, even if he's not going to be part of the future. So I'd like to see him stick around in Phoenix at least for another season. If he gets moved at the deadline next year, I'd be a little bit more okay with that. But I'd like him to stick around one more summer, one more off season, keep kind of teaching the young guys how to be successful in this league. And PJ, I'm kind of split on. It seems like he's been kind of following Tyson's lead and guiding the young guys a little bit. And with his work ethic and his hustle and the way he approaches every practice and every game, I like having that on this young team. But at the same time, he's on an expiring deal and he's probably not coming back. And if you can find a team that's willing to give up a first-round pick for him, I think you have to take that deal.
Well, unfortunately, and it's not because I don't love you both, I agree with absolutely everything you guys have said. And what really pains me is that Eric Bledsoe has been my favorite player on the Suns since he started. I just kind of really loved his game. I really loved what he brought to the table, both offensively and defensively. He's the best defensive point guard we've had since a kid. And that's saying a lot because we're bypassing a future Hall of Famer and Steve Nash. But he really just proved to be the one player on this team outside of Booker who just is not moving that would bring the most back guaranteed. My question is, where does he get moved to if he does get moved? Because I just don't know what teams are out there that would be willing to make that kind of blockbuster move to trade for a guy like Bledsoe. He is only 27. He is still in the, at least in the beginning of his prime, saying, provided that he stays healthy. So I hate to say it truthfully, but I do think the Suns need to trade him. And I truthfully think, because of exactly what Andrew brought up, I think they need to trade him now. And I don't think they should wait until the offseason because, you want to try to get as much as you can for him. And by giving that new team an extra 25 games with him will definitely add value to him. But also because they are presumably going to be drafting a point guard who will presumably be the point guard of the future and could be for a decade. So you got to make sure that you're going to tank enough to guarantee that you get that pick. Because let's say, for the sake of argument, Suns do manage to find a taker for Brandon Knight, and let's say, for the sake of argument, they bring in a talent, amongst whatever trades they do make that improves the team. And all of a sudden, like the Miami Heat, who had the second worst pick about 3 weeks ago, now the Miami Heat have won 11 games in a row. They're now the 10th worst team in the league. So they're even bumping themselves out of the lottery, and they still probably won't make the playoffs because I believe they're still like 10 or 12 games below 500. So even that would be very difficult for them. So what if, by any chance, that happens to the Suns? Now it just kind of screwed itself out of that point guard of the future. So I think you got to try to find that trade partner and dance with them. Buy them a margarita or six, and just get that trade going. Other than that, I mean, the one, and Kory, you and I talked about this in our last podcast, the one thing I just am wary of, no matter who they go after, is I really am just afraid of trading that first round pick, especially because we're looking at Philadelphia right now, who owns the Los Angeles Lakers 2017 first round pick that was the Suns, that we traded essentially for Brandon Knight. And what the Suns would love to have right now is 2 lottery picks, 2 top 5 picks is what Philadelphia is probably going to end up with. And if nothing else, you have additional trade leverage because it's like, okay, I still can trade one of those and get my point guard. Whereas now the Suns, if they trade one, they don't have that future point guard, especially if they don't think that Eric Bledsoe is the future because of his age. So I've just always been wary, even for DeMarcus Cousins, to trade him a pick. But I would do anything possible to move Bled now. And then I agree with you, Kory. I would keep Tyson. And PJ, I do think you'll re-sign if he'll take a 2-year deal. Because offensively, he's just nothing to write home about. And you're hoping that TJ Warren, if they don't move him, is our small forward of the future, especially from the offensive end. And then if you draft Andrew, what's the Jackson kid? Is it Josh Jackson as the small forward?
It is Josh. That's the guy they need.
Yeah. So if they somehow end up with him, now you can at least still have PJ to kind of be that binding veteran force that you've got right there. So I would try to keep him for 2 years. I just No, I don't know. I really have no clue what his free agent market would be. But
Yeah, well, going back to Bledsoe for a second, if we were to hypothetically think about the teams that might be interested in him, I think one of the problems right now is if you look at teams that maybe don't have a point guard or maybe could use an upgrade like Bledsoe at point guard, I don't know if there's any real suitors out there for Phoenix. I mean, you guys can fill in my blanks here, but off the top of my head, I think you look at teams like Dallas, ironically Sacramento, and then maybe teams like Atlanta, where Schroeder has kind of not completely worked out, I think, the way they hoped. And
yeah, but then he just re-signed those, so that'd be a lot of money tying into the point guard position.
Except with Bledsoe's contract, it's not, though. That's the thing. I think Bledsoe is a valuable commodity, not only because of how well he's playing, but because $14 million is, I mean, that's Timothy Mozgov is getting more than that with the Lakers right now. $14 million in the new CBA and the new NBA, and with all the funny money that was thrown around last summer, $14 million is nothing. So I don't know. Can you guys think of any other places that might be good locations? I think that's the problem. It's easy to sit here and say, oh, I want him to be traded, and I do, but it's really hard to find concrete deals because there seems to be a wealth of point guards out there right now.
Yeah, and then especially when you think of who are the lottery teams that might end up with the point guard in the draft, they might not want to trade for a point guard either.
Yeah, and I mean, there's 4 of the top 5 picks maybe point guards this season. So,
Yeah.
or
Well,
point
and
guards,
I think the two that I would throw out there to look at is Denver and Philadelphia. I think Denver's interesting because there's some serious questions about whether Moutier can play.
Yeah.
And they need a point guard, and they have a lot of assets at their disposal. So I don't know that they're necessarily willing to do it, but I think there's somebody you at least want to talk to. Philadelphia is actually the spot I think is the best fit for Bledsoe style-wise. If you read Zach Lowe's article, I thought he did a good job of framing up that even though Bledsoe's improved, almost everybody agrees that for Bledsoe to be at his peak, he needs to be off the ball a lot more than he is now.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really only a few players that can allow you to do that. It's LeBron James, and it looks like Ben Simmons is going to be one of those. So if you can put Bledsoe in a spot where he's the third option or the second option, and he can block in on the defensive end, he's probably going to thrive. So I don't think Philadelphia is willing to give up picks this year, but if they're willing to give up future assets and they're willing to give up a Goran Dragic deal, we'll give you 2, far distant or first round picks. That might be something to look at.
Yeah,
this might be a really
they'd have to be
off-the-wall
unprotected,
one,
I think.
What about the Clippers? Because Chris Paul is a free agent after this year. There had already been talk that Chris Paul, that the Clippers might not be willing to re-sign Chris Paul for the money that he might deserve just based on his age. He's now going to be coming off of a really bad hand injury. What if in the off season, if Bledsoe hasn't moved now, would the Clippers be an option? Just throwing that out there. You don't necessarily.
If Chris Paul left for some reason, I think it would definitely be an option because they need a point guard. I'll be honest, I just have trouble seeing Paul leaving. I don't really see that happening until it does. If it ever did, of course, Bledsoe would be an obvious fit there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I'm just throwing. That's obviously you got to have about a dozen things happen to make that even possible. But it's just kind of something popped up in my head. But all right, well, thank you guys. Tonight we covered DeMarcus Cousins again, real quick. We covered Jahlil Okafor, and then we covered the future of the Suns. What do we do next since both those players appear to be off the board? I do want to thank Kory Miller and Andrew Clark for coming on. I'm actually now doing Kory's job as we speak. He's usually one that closes this all up, and I don't know why I just jumped in with this. But I do want to just let everybody know, please follow us on Facebook at it's facebook.com//Phoenix Suns blog. And then we are on Twitter at Valley of the Suns. And then you can also email us at votsuns@gmail.com. And by the way, Andrew referenced the Zach Lowe article. If you want to find that one, please visit our Facebook page, again, Phoenix Suns blog. And I just shared that about 3 days ago. I want to say it was on February 3rd or 4th. So you can check that out up there and read it and go through our page to be able to find that information. Well, so thanks for listening, everybody. And Kory, have a good night. Andrew, have a good night.
Thanks.
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right. Goodbye.